School at Rutgers issued a report, I guess within the last year, essentially saying the same thing and concluding that New Jersey's economy is possibly in a more dangerous state than even during the Depression period.
Yeah,
one of the reasons was the one you just cited.
I think they're very concerned about the question of the decline of those industries. I mean, when you look at Bell Labs, I think at one time Bell Labs in Murray Hill, which was near where my parents lived, they had more Nobel Prize winners than the Soviet Union. I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal. And they were people that were just essentially fellows who were left alone. And nobody told them that they had to produce such and such. They were left alone, and they created the transistors. That sort of free thinking, Lucky argues in our article, is gone. Everybody's under the idea of having to make a lot of money for the next quarter. What about long-term profits? Well, that's just not true. That's just not part of our mindset anymore.
So one of the problems is that corporations are either moving out of the state or outsourcing to places like India. You call a computer company today and you're likely to get a representative who's in India. But the corporations are still complaining about the corporate tax. How can we explain that?
Well,
I think simply an interest group kind of situation?
No, I think they really do believe that the taxes are onerous. They are higher than some other areas. There's no question about it. One of the arguments that is made by the Blaustein Group is the taxes are chasing some people away. So I do think you see some of that. Also, the way the taxes applied don't make any sense. I mean, I was talking to a person who heads up a new UPS store. If you buy a box there for your mail, you've got to pay sales tax. If I walk across the street to the Hamilton Post Office, I don't have to pay any sales tax. And I don't think a lot of that stuff is thought out. I did a kind of tongue-in-cheek piece about what is covered and what isn't covered by the new rules and regulations concerning the 6% tax. I mean, if you rent a limo to come up here to Montclair State, I have to pay tax on it. But if you rent the limo to go to the neighboring cemetery, because that's where you're ending up, you don't have to pay the tax on that.
Well, there's the famous toilet paper tax during the Florio, at the beginning of the Florio administration.
Yeah.
But speaking of Florio, his administration created a lot of controversy and opposition because of raising the income tax. The income tax in New Jersey, again, tends to be lower than the income tax in other states. But I guess because of the shadow of the Florio administration, it's very, very difficult to talk about that in the state.
It's very difficult to raise income taxes in general because people see it. The best taxes are taxes that are repeated over and over again and that are hidden. I mean, for the longest time, people didn't realize they were still paying the World War II tax on their phone bill. It just was there, and 40 years later, it was still there. And finally, I think people began to realize, gee, why is this tax still here? And I think that the best thing that politicians can do is to hide taxes, and they know that, and especially to hide them before election years.
Well, it's hard to hide an increase in the income tax.
It's very hard to hide an increase in income tax because you look and all of a sudden you see that you're making less money than you did the week before. That's one of the problems you have with Social Security. People hit that cap and all of a sudden they realize they have more money. They say, well, how come I have more money this week? And they say, well, you're not paying the Social Security tax anymore. You hit the level.
So what's the answer to this? I'm reluctant to use the word solution. Maybe there's an answer. If we look at almost every gubernatorial administration, I guess going back to Florio, people have complained about property taxes, #1 issue in many cases. What should we do about it?
Well, I think the only way to really cut property taxes are for people to seriously look at cutting services. And nobody wants to face that. I mean, they just simply want to say, well, the reason why we have such high property taxes, it's a corruption tax. If we weren't so corrupt, if we really were Wisconsin, we wouldn't have taxes that are this high. But the fact is that people like their small communities. They like their small school districts. They have a more intense loyalty to their school districts than they do to the state. They're more likely, except this year, to follow football at Montclair High School than they are to follow football at Rutgers University. Now, that's changed this year, obviously. But I mean, the intensity of the local interest in New Jersey is very, very strong. But I think you pay for all of those.
Hasn't that outgrown itself in a lot of ways? Most of our problems are regional problems,
most of
or
our
state,
problems,
or even national problems.
Yeah, most
today.
of our problems are regional, there's no question about it. Our police problems, a good example. We have in Hamilton a police force that stops at the water's edge, but we have very strong gang activity that begins to spill over. The job of the police essentially is to stop the gang activity from spilling over from Trenton and the other cities into Hamilton. That's what the police department basically does. They do a very good job of it. But I think people want to have control over those schools, because that's one of the reasons why a lot of people moved. They moved out of New York City because they wanted to get away from the big city. They wanted to get away from the lack of control in the boroughs. And they came into New Jersey and they moved to Jackson, or they moved to Edison, or they moved up to Glen Ridge. They love their small school districts and they love their small communities, even though most people don't play much of a role anymore in community government, municipal government, because they don't have the time. They're home on the train. By the time they get home, it's 9 o'clock.
Let me play devil's advocate for a moment. We're talking about people moving out of the state. What's so bad about that? In some ways, can't that help the state?
Well, I think that you have people moving in and people moving out. You see a large flux of immigration into New Jersey.
Especially around here.
And you see a flight of what's probably the middle class and upper middle class out. We had a study done and showing people really moving across the river. That is from Mercer County, Middlesex County, literally across the river, and you can see them living in Bucks County or living across in other parts of Pennsylvania. When you see the end of the day, as I do in Trenton, you'd be surprised how many people are going across the bridge into Pennsylvania to go home.
That's been happening for a while.
And everyone talks about the traffic jam. That's the only traffic jam in Trenton. It's the traffic jam to get out of Trenton.
We've got about 3 minutes left. How's the governor doing?
Well, I think the governor's trying to get a handle on the problems that the state is facing. And he's trying to go through them in a logical, sequential way and somewhat take the politics out of what's happening. And the people in New Jersey, about 49%, have given him an approval rating. Governors have a tough time. Even those who are later beloved, like Brendan Byrne, have a difficult time when they're in office. It's not an easy job to do, Bill. I'm not sure I would have left the U.S. Senate to do it.
It's the most powerful governorship in the United States.
On paper, it's the most powerful governorship, but in reality, it's highly circumscribed by the power of the state machines, the county machines, the unions, and what Corzine has, of course, is an advantage, which is independent wealth. But the day of Woodrow Wilson walking down the street to make a presentation based on the opinion of the people behind him, I think that's few and far between.
Again, in the short time we have left, one of the issues that seem to be on the top of the list for a lot of people, I guess more nationally than in the state, is corruption, ethics. Are we a more corrupt state than
Well,
others?
we have a whole bunch of issues on the Hall website on corruption. When I first came back to New Jersey, I dared to say that we were not the most corrupt state in the Union, and I got more nasty letters as if I had taken away the state identity. I think that we have certainly more corruption than I feel comfortable with, but I don't think that corruption is simply an indigenous industry to New Jersey.
We're not as bad as Louisiana.
And not as bad even as, in some cases, as the Midwest now, where we used to think was fairly corruption-free.
Is one of the problems in respect to corruption the fact that we have so many governments?
Well, that's been the argument.
It's not that visible to people.
We have too many governments. We have too many opportunities, and I think that Chris Christie's to be saluted for his attempt to deal with some of those more egregious problems.
Mm-hmm. And again, 1 minute left now. It seems to me this relates in some respects to the whole issue of political participation or public participation, which in a lot of ways I think the whole Institute is trying to promote. A more vigilant public might be able to control this issue better. Do you think that's a fair way to put it?
I think Justice Brandeis once said that the best disinfectant is sunlight. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring some sunlight, but also let people know what the intelligent options are before them.
Well, it seems to me you've been a good spokesman for what the whole Institute represents. And I wish you a lot of luck. We need it in the state.
Thank you very much.
Okay. If you'd like more information about this or any other Carpe Diem program, you could write to us at the email address on your screen, carpediem@mail.montclair.edu, or call us at 977